Okay, why don't we get started? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Contra Costa County Focused Workshop. We're going to get started now. Thank you so much for being here. To start things off, I would like to introduce ABAG Executive Board Member and Clayton Mayor, Julie Pierce. Oh, you're muted. Mayor Pierce, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I am Clayton Mayor and ABAG Board Member Julie Pierce. We would like to welcome you to the Plan Bay Area 2050 Digital Public Workshop. Next slide. We are happy you are joining us this evening for a workshop focused on Contra Costa County. I want to start off by saying that we hope you, your family, and loved ones are all safe and healthy during this challenging time. This workshop is one of 9 county workshops that we are providing Bay Area wide, given the requirement for physical distancing. MTC and ABAG will be holding all of these workshops digitally and by telephone. So we're glad you were able to join us tonight. While some of the information presented today will be about Contra Costa County, we welcome anyone to participate. Today, we are seeking input on Plan Bay Area's 2050 draft blueprint, which is a 30-year regional vision for to create a more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant Bay Area for all. The draft blueprint is a first draft of Plan Bay Area 2050, integrating 25 resilient and equitable strategies that aim to make the Bay Area a better place in the areas of transportation, housing, the environment, and the economy. The blueprint is a critical step in the Plan Bay Area 2050 process. We have engaged the Bay Area public over the last 2 years in order to get input on the strategies we will review today. What we hear today will help us, thank you. What we hear today will help us refine the draft blueprint, which is slated for approval this fall and will be integrated into Plan Bay Area 2050 prior to its adoption in mid-2021. Next slide, please. In addition to acknowledging the challenges we're experiencing because of the pandemic, we also want to state our support of the Black community and all communities affected by violence and injustice that has claimed far too many lives here in the Bay Area and across the country. As regional agencies that focus on transportation, housing, the environment, and the economy of the Bay Area, it's our role to increase access to opportunity. We stand side by side with those working toward a fair and just society. Again, on behalf of MTC and ABAG, I want to thank you for spending a couple of hours with us this evening to provide your input. With that, I'll turn it over to MTC ABAG Regional Planning Director, Matt Maloney, for a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pierce. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to welcome you to one of our 9 county-focused digital workshops that we will hold over the next few weeks. Before we begin our workshop, I'd just like to mention MTC's equity platform, which highlights MTC's commitment to equity within our agency and with MTC's regional projects and programs. So for more information on the equity platform, the URL is listed here right on this slide at the bottom of the screen. The Plan Bay Area 2050 draft blueprint is a culmination of 2+ years of work, talking with the public about their vision for the Bay Area and the strategies that will help make that vision a reality. The information we will present today is a culmination of that input, and we look forward to hearing from you today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce MTC ABAG staff member Ursula Vogler, who will walk you through the next steps in the workshop.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you, Mayor Pierce. I also want to recognize some other attendees. Supervisors Karen Mitchoff and Candace Anderson, and also San Ramon City Council Member Dave Hudson. Thank you so much for attending today and listening. I'm Ursula Vogler, work in public engagement at MTC and ABAG, and I will serve as your host for today's workshop. I'm so happy to be joining you today to get your input on the draft blueprint. I'd like to provide an overview of today's workshop. First, MTC and ABAG planning staff members Anoop Tapasi and Rachel Hartofilis will introduce Plan Bay Area 2050 and its draft blueprint. This will include an introductory video that will help us provide the detail about the blueprint. Next, they will share findings from the strategies analyzed as part of the draft blueprint and review local impacts. We will pause for clarifying questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You may type your questions and comments there at any time during the workshop. Then they will walk you through our interactive poll activity. This is where we will use the Poll EV program and will explain how to use the program in the next slide. Our planning staff will then highlight important regional programs before moving into the question and answer period. Finally, we will wrap up by providing information about how you can access additional resources and provide additional input. Next slide. Before we dig into the presentation, I'd like to go over a handful of logistics for today's workshop. I want to note that the workshop is being recorded and the recording will be posted to the Plan Bay Area website. To ensure all participants can provide input, everyone will be muted during the workshop. We encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please type your questions or comments at any time during the workshop. Staff will answer questions directly in the Q&A feature or during key points of the workshop verbally. We will also be using the polling platform Poll EV. To participate in the poll activity, you can use your smartphone, computer, or tablet. For an internet-enabled device, please use a web browser and go to pollev.com/MTCABAG302. When we begin the poll, the questions will populate automatically on your device. If you're joining us by phone only, you can still participate using the text option on your cell phone. To participate, please text MTC ABAG, A-B-A-G, 302 to the number 22333. Please note that those of you joining us by phone only will not be able to answer questions and comments through the webinar platform. However, there is an opportunity to submit your comments verbally by phone. After the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which we will enter into the official record. Again, you can participate in the poll by texting your responses to each question. There are additional ways to provide comments during the public comment period, which runs through August 10th. As I just mentioned, you can provide verbal comments by calling our comment line, or if you have detailed written comments, please send them to info@planbayarea.org. We will post this information again at the end of the workshop. Last, please note that profanity or culturally insensitive comments will not be tolerated at any time. We look forward to a productive workshop. Now let's dive in. We're going to start off with an icebreaker question so that we can all get comfortable with the polling software we are using. Please go to this Poll EV URL in your web browser now, pollev.com/MTCABAG302 or text MTCABAG302 to the number 22333. The question should be on your web browser now. We would like to know, pre-COVID-19, how did you typically get to work? If you're joining us by text, you can send your response by typing the letter associated with your answer choice, which I will read now for those on the phone. For bus, select A. For subway or train, select B. For personal car, select C. For carpool, select D. For taxi or TNC like Uber or Lyft, select E. For bike, select F. For walk, select G. For ferry, select H. For other or not applicable, select I. Okay, I'll give you guys a minute to respond. And it looks like most of you drive. Some people walk, nice. Some people take the bus, and not applicable or subway or train is next. Oh, it's coming in fast and furious here. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to our planning staff, Anoop and Rachel, who will guide us through the content of today's workshop.
Thank you, Ursula. Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We are excited to be here to talk with you and the public about Planned Bay Area 2050 draft blueprint. We have worked to create a more comprehensive 30-year vision for the region's future, integrating 4 elements: transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. In today's presentation, we'll highlight the strategies at the center of the draft blueprint, touch on some of the key regional and county outcomes based on these strategies, and seek your input on how to tackle the challenges we think that remain prior to moving on to the final blueprint. As Mayor Pierce noted in her opening remarks, the draft blueprint is all about working towards a regional vision of a more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant Bay Area, not just for some, not just those who own cars or own homes, but for all Bay Area residents. Building on top of more than 2 years of work to develop the most resilient and equitable strategies to tackle our region's big challenges, the draft blueprint includes 25 bold strategies to make the region better for the next generation. It's important to underscore that none of these strategies are near-term actions or legislative proposals. They are ideas for our cities, towns, the region, and the state to consider over the long term to address challenges across the Bay Area and beyond. To learn more, let's now turn to a brief video describing the draft blueprint and its strategies. Again, as Ursula mentioned, please feel free to enter comments and questions into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we will answer them at set points during the workshop. Of course, we'd be remiss in not acknowledging how profoundly the coronavirus pandemic and the 2020 recession are affecting our lives right now. While we didn't predict the pandemic, we have been planning for uncertainty in the recent years. All the strategies in the draft blueprint have been stress tested against many of the unanticipated forces we are experiencing today, and they held up to those stress tests. These types of forces range from higher levels of telecommuting, greater adoption of e-commerce, to boom-bust economic cycles, among others. While this summer is a great time to ensure that our strategies are best aligned with the post-COVID future, it's important to note that some of the strategies are incredibly timely for the moment we all are in. These include quick-build bicycle improvements for a world where public transit has much lower capacity requirements, renter protections for families at risk of eviction, childcare subsidies, and other services for our essential workers, and of course, expanded open space investments for a point in time when we are all too often seeking respite from sheltering in place. Now let's learn more about the full suite of the strategies in the draft blueprint and turn to the brief video. If you have trouble hearing or seeing the video, we have also posted a link to the video in the chat.
Hi, thank you for joining us. As we navigate these unprecedented times, we thank you for taking a moment to think about the future. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments are creating a plan to make the Bay Area more resilient in the face of unexpected challenges like the one we are experiencing now. How we react to these challenges is key to making the Bay Area more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. Over the next few minutes, we will outline our ideas for the future in a plan we call Planned Bay Area 2050, the regional vision for transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment for the next 3 decades. The heart of the plan, what we are calling the blueprint, is what we'll be focusing on today. Over the last 2 years, we asked people like you for ideas on solutions to meet the Bay Area's transportation and housing challenges and ensure the region's economic resilience and extraordinary natural beauty. We analyzed the most promising recommendations to come up with 25 proposed strategies, which together make up the draft blueprint. We're excited to share these strategies and hear how we can fine-tune them in the months ahead. We're looking to improve our transportation system by considering how we can maintain and optimize existing infrastructure, create healthy and safe streets, and enhance regional and local transit. These include integrating fare payment and trip planning for all Bay Area transit agencies, lowering speed limits, and redesigning local streets with community input to promote walking and bicycling, including 7,000 miles of new bike lanes and paths, and advancing transit projects with high ridership, such as a new Trans-Bay rail crossing. We're committed to advancing bold housing strategies that can spur Bay Area housing production, including affordable housing in walkable communities. We can do this by reducing barriers to build housing near transit, transforming aging shopping malls and office parks into neighborhoods, and requiring more affordable housing units be built. To ensure the resilience of our region's economy, we're exploring how we can increase wages and shift the location of jobs by retaining industrial lands that can help us maintain a healthy manufacturing sector, discouraging development of new office parks in areas not well served by transit by imposing a fee on new developments, and expanding a 50% child care subsidy to all low-income households with children under 5, allowing more parents to remain in or enter the workforce. And to protect the natural environment that makes the Bay Area so unique, we are considering how we can reduce risks from hazards and minimize our impact on the environment by adapting to sea level rise in our coastal and bayside communities, expanding our climate program, which implements innovative projects to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions, and ensuring development is focused within existing city boundaries. Thank you for joining us. Please engage with us on the plan by visiting planbayarea.org or on Facebook and Twitter at MTC Bata. Your input will help us create the final blueprint, which will feed into Plan Bay Area 2050. Thank you.
Apologies if you experience technical issues there or experience poor video and audio quality. I promise it sounds a lot better than what it sounded like. But there is a link in your chat box that you can click on and look at the video after as well. But this slide here provides a summary of what you just heard. 25 strategies in the draft blueprint spanning transportation, housing, economy, and the environment. We have clustered them into these 9 categories. The draft blueprint maintains and optimizes our existing transportation infrastructure while also redesigning our streets and investing in regional and local transit. On housing, the draft blueprint spurs housing production at all income levels and encourages more affordable housing in all communities. In economy, the draft blueprint strives to improve economic mobility through childcare subsidies and job incubator programs, as well as through strategies to shift the location of jobs closer to homes. Last but not least, the draft blueprint invests in sea level rise protections, home retrofits, and protects our natural and agricultural lands from development. Ultimately, all these strategies can work together as a package to make our communities more resilient and equitable in the years ahead. If you'd like to learn more about these strategies, check out our website. We have a convenient booklet describing all of them. So this is not the first time we've done public engagement for Plan Bay Area 2050. As Mayor Pierce said, this is over 2 years in the making. And in fact, in fall 2019, which was one of our prior rounds of outreach, we got nearly 13,000 comments from pop-up workshops across all 9 counties, as well as through an online tool called the Mayor of Bayville. We were pleased to see the amount of support for taking bold actions to make the Bay Area better for future generations. 90% of all the comments we received at that time were supportive of the strategies that we have now integrated into the draft blueprint. We know that your feedback today will help us further improve this final blueprint, which is slated for release this fall. It's also a great opportunity to focus on strategies to more directly address the needs of the post-COVID era. Let's talk a little bit about the draft blueprint and what we saw were the outcomes for the Bay Area. Combined, the 25 strategies make significant progress on some key regional issue areas. Of course, they don't solve all our region's problems, and that's why we are here gathered for this workshop today, so you can give us feedback on how we can move the needle even further. Starting with some of the housing outcomes, which is the most pressing issue in our area. One notable highlight is that the draft blueprint's housing and transportation strategies together would enable us to start reversing the decades-long trend of rising unaffordability in the area. As of 2015, the average Bay Area household spent 57% of their household income on housing and transportation. But by enabling more housing near transit and in communities with well-resourced schools, we're projecting a forecasted reduction by 9 percentage points to 48% of household income by 2050. And this reduction is even greater for low-income households, driven by a significant number of permanently affordable new homes we call deed-restricted affordable housing, as well as income-based discounts for tolls and transit fares. Second one, funding the draft blueprint enables the construction of over 400,000 permanently affordable homes, or the deed-restricted affordable homes, which leads to even greater affordability benefits for those who are least able to afford our region's high housing costs. Furthermore, a lot of this new growth is focused in walkable communities with frequent nearby transit service, which enables more people to walk, bicycle, and take public transit. By 2050, we forecast that 43% of all households in the region will be able to walk to a high-frequency public transit service within that has service every 15 minutes or better. On the environmental front, there's more good news. Investments in bicycle infrastructure and speed limit reductions to make our streets safer that were discussed in the video earlier could save more than 1,500 lives over the next 30 years. And while this is certainly not enough to get to zero fatalities or vision zero by 2050, it is a meaningful step forward to address the deaths on our region's road system today. With regards to hazards, natural hazards, things like earthquakes and sea level rise, retrofits to homes as well as seawalls and levees included in the draft blueprint address 100% of all homes at high risk of damage in an earthquake, as well as 98% of all homes threatened by sea level rise over the 30-year time horizon. Lastly, despite the significant tax increases that are required to pay for many of these strategies, tax increases that primarily affect businesses and higher income individuals, we are seeing that Bay Area businesses remain positioned for further growth in the decades ahead, even as we face a major recession. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rachel Hartefillis, who will walk through the outcomes of our analysis in more detail.
Thanks, Anoop. So let's dig into some of the details related to the draft blueprint. The Bay Area is expected to grow by 2.7 million people and 1.4 million new jobs over the planning time horizon. To ensure that this additional growth does not lead to continued increases in housing costs, it's essential that we produce enough affordable housing to meet this demand, as well as to address overcrowding and displacement that we see today. For some households, this means market rate construction, and for others, we need to have public subsidies to ensure that the rent or mortgage is within reach. To do this, the draft blueprint includes 1.5 million new housing units, including over 400,000 permanently protected housing units for the lowest income households. Importantly, the draft blueprint includes one new home for every one new job. This slide shows where that growth might occur with the strategies included in the draft blueprint. You can see on the left side that 41% of all new housing growth is forecasted for Santa Clara County, the heart of Silicon Valley. Also, 27% of the growth is being forecasted for the East Bay and 20% for San Francisco and the Peninsula. The North Bay continues to have relatively limited growth. Approximately 14% of all new housing units would be in the North Bay. On the right side, you can see a breakdown of the job growth. The trend here, which is also similar, shows a significant proportion, 44% of all new jobs, located in Silicon Valley, with continued clustering in the region's largest job center. Job growth is more limited in other parts of the region, but there's also significant growth in Alameda County, San Francisco County, and San Mateo County. Importantly, 70% of the housing growth is in areas within a half mile of frequent transit, and 50% of all new jobs are located in those areas. As noted earlier, this is why much of the region's growth is focused in walkable places near public transportation. The draft blueprint also includes a breakdown of where growth might occur on a more localized level, as you can see here for your county in Contra Costa. So in the draft blueprint, new homes are clustered around BART stations and historic downtowns and in new communities. The overall number of units is relatively balanced throughout the county. The anticipated job growth is focused along the northern waterfront, with additional service sector job growth in the East County, which is aligned with continued housing development. Ultimately, this growth pattern would provide Bay Area residents more choices in terms of transportation. We anticipate that 17%, or roughly 1 in 5 Bay Area workers, would change their commuting patterns as a result. In addition to significant growth in telecommuting, we also see more Bay Area residents choosing to walk, bicycle, or take public transit thanks to the investments in bicycle infrastructure, transit infrastructure, and the additional density that's near the transit stations. We also know that climate change is creating huge challenges for our region, as it's bounded by water on nearly all sides. Plan Bay Area 2050 is the first long-range plan that integrates sea level rise protections to make sure that communities are not flooded due to sea level rise. On the left, you can see a breakdown of the number of units at risk from sea level rise, and also the share of those units that are protected. Most notably, San Francisco, Marin, and San Mateo counties all have large numbers of housing at risk due to sea level rise. But in those counties, as well as most other counties in the Bay Area, a system of levees, horizontal levees, marshland restoration, and other sorts of environmental protections ensure that nearly all of the homes in those communities are protected from flooding. In total, the protections in the draft blueprint protect 89,000 homes from flooding, with just 2,000 homes still at risk, and 160,000 job sites with just 10,000 jobs unprotected. These strategies also include over 100,000 acres of marsh restoration, as well as protections or elevations of all major highways and rail corridors through the year 2050. So what does this mean for Contra Costa County in terms of infrastructure improvements? Several of the key transportation projects for Contra Costa County include the widening of State Route 4 or 239, the expansion of the Express Lanes network, the Brentwood BRT, and potentially a new Trans-Bay rail crossing. As for shoreline segments that are protected, it includes the San Joaquin Rail Corridor, low-lying sections in North Richmond, and over 10,000 acres of marsh restoration. While we make a lot of progress in the draft blueprint, advancing equity, improving affordability, and protecting the Bay Area's environment, we're still falling short on one central environmental goal, and that's addressing climate change. Plan Bay Area 2050 is required by state law to include strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 19% per person by the year 2035. From tolling the region's freeways to enabling more growth near BART stations and more, the draft blueprint strategies that we've showcased today move the needle quite a bit. We estimate that they could yield up to a 12 percentage point reduction as a result of all the strategies combined. But the state target is 19 percentage points. This means that the remaining gap of roughly 7 percentage points will need new or expanded strategies in the final blueprint to close that gap. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Ursula, who will introduce the staff that's going to help us identify any clarifying questions that we have so far.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. Now is that time for you guys to type in your questions below. And before we get started, I want to introduce some of our staff members who will be handling the Q&A. First, my public engagement colleague, Leslie Lara Enriquez, will manage the questions. Ross McEwen from our Funding, Policy, and Programs section will handle any funding and other questions you have. And then Matt Maloney and Heather Peters from our Regional Planning section will join Anoop and Rachel to answer the questions. So again, if you haven't already, please type your questions into the Q&A box and our colleagues will answer them. As a reminder, for those of you joining us by phone only, you will not be able to ask a question as part of this meeting. Please jot your questions down now, and after the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which we will enter into the official record. You can also send us an email at info@planbayarea.org. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Leslie.
Great, thank you, Ursula. We've received 2 great questions. Again, if you have additional questions or comments, please enter them into the Q&A box now. The first question is MTC thinking and collaborating futuristically about rail and considering options to replace or augment BART with innovative options like Elon Musk's Hyperloop? Why or why not? I wonder if Anoop or maybe Matt want to take this question.
Hi, thank you for the question. Yes, I'm happy to take the question. So while in the past we have only sourced ideas for transportation projects only from county or transit agencies, this time for the first time in our history, we have actually opened up the process to get ideas from the public, as well as anyone else that wanted to submit a project idea. And I believe we also did reach out to Hyperloop, encouraging them to submit ideas, although unfortunately we didn't hear from them. But we did receive some interesting ideas from the public on maglev rail, on Hyperloop, and various ideas that involve autonomous vehicles. And so we studied some of those projects. We have a project prioritization process called Project Performance, where we did analysis on many of these projects. Turns out some of these futuristic ideas right now are really expensive as they are and turn out to have a lower benefit cost ratio relative to many of the other ideas we studied, and so they have not been prioritized for now. But we are certainly open for studying these ideas more in the future.
Great, thank you, Anoop. Our next question from Kristen also, why is there no regional jobs needs allocation established to bring economic viability to low-income areas and reverse the commute? Why is MTC only trying to solve the commute problems with more housing versus better disbursement of jobs? And I don't know if Anoop or maybe Matt or Rachel, whoever wants to take that one.
I can start.
Okay, yeah, Anoop, you start, and I'll clean up if I need to.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to defer to Matt for the regional jobs needs allocation. That is an interesting idea. But we actually, if you look at our list of strategies, they're not only trying to bring in more housing to where the jobs are, but there are strategies that actually try to encourage jobs to move to where the housing are too. So these strategies include placing a fee on businesses that encourage more vehicle miles traveled. So if new businesses choose to locate their headquarters or offices away from transit and therefore may encourage more driving, then there would be a fee assessed on them to help fund more transit options or other options to help decrease VMT. So Matt, I will defer to you on the regional jobs needs allocation.
Yeah, sure. I want to add just a couple things to that. I think the first piece of this, which I'm not sure that the presentation covered, but I think it's important for Contra Costa County, is that this round we did incorporate sort of a new growth geography called priority production areas, or PPAs, and these are locally nominated areas. Which sort of, rather than being just solely for housing growth, they're really areas to try to retain or attract job growth and also kind of protect the industrial base of the region. And, you know, we had talked a little bit about the northern waterfront area, and that is an area certainly where local jurisdictions have stepped up and nominated some of those areas as PPAs, or priority production areas. And, you know, our hope as we move forward, kind of post-plan and move into the funding environment with some of this, is that, you know, I think the hope is that the region could support some of these areas with some infrastructure funding in order to get those going and to kind of protect those industrial bases. So I think that's one piece. I think the other thing that I want to mention, it really comes back to the strategies. And so we showed you a bit of a picture of the 25 strategies that are incorporated in the plan. And I believe a little bit later, we'll have an effort here kind of in a workshop setting to get more ideas in terms of strategies. You know, this is a policy-based plan. And so really what it requires is thinking about what would be required from a strategy or public policy angle to kind of change that trajectory of job growth. And, you know, I agree that, you know, getting jobs closer to where housing is in this region would do a lot to help in terms of the jobs housing balance, and also help close gaps that we see with GHG. Because the key is really to get people to live closer to where they work. So I think the question and kind of the challenge for this group is really, what is the strategy? What is the regional policy that can be implemented to help achieve that? So I think we look forward maybe to a little more back and forth about that later.
Great, thank you both. The next question from Nati is, what are the plans to connect bikeways city to city? I don't know if Rachel wants to jump in, or Anoop.
I can take this one. We do not, as part of our plan, we do not have specific proposals for bike lanes. There's definitely a lot more to come with the regional active transportation plan that our planning section is also going to commence working on very soon. But I will say that the way our bicycle strategy was envisioned was to lay out about 7,000 miles of bicycle infrastructure, both protected and unprotected. And we have received several ideas like regional bike superhighways. And so those will be under consideration in the active transportation plan.
Thank you, Anoop. Another great clarifying question from Dan. What are the suggested fees for new office uses?
Does anyone have an answer to that? If not, Dan, thanks for the question. I'll have to look that up in the details and get back to you.
Great, thank you, Anoop. Another question, on Bollinger Canyon Road, the median says reserved for future light rail. Is that in planning?
Thanks for that question. I am not familiar with that particular project, nor am I aware of any light rail project that we were studying in Contra Costa County.
It might be something that I didn't, my internet kind of went down there for a minute. It might be also something that that would be worked on in partnership with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. So it might be included in their plan, although I apologize, I didn't hear precisely what facility you were referring to.
So that was Bollinger Canyon. I don't know if that rings a bell.
Yeah, I think I am not sure whether it is a project that's included in our plan. It probably doesn't rise to the level of a major capital project for what we evaluate. So it might be something that I would ask our colleagues over at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Great, thank you, Matt. The next question is from Lisa. What other strategies do you see being options for the further reduction of greenhouse gases to the minimum of 19% per capita? This should be the minimum, not the target. The IPCC goals are to eliminate greenhouse gases by 2050. For example, teleworking has become more prominent. This should be encouraged, more incentives, etc. To move to automated cars would ensure that there are EVs, more investments to EV stations. So the question.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I can jump in a bit on that. So I think this is a sort of a critical question for us in our planning process. Our plan is required to achieve a 19% per capita GHG reduction by 2035. And what we're required to do in our plan is fairly, it's a narrow set of all GHG. So we're focused primarily on reductions from automobiles and light duty trucks. So the trick is really getting people closer to where they work. That's sort of the major strategy. But some of the things that we're thinking about that I think the questioner brought up a bit were, I think first and foremost, I think something that's on everyone's mind is telecommuting. Obviously, it's something that we're seeing sort of explode for people that sort of have the luxury to do so, for office workers. We have in our planning sort of upped our assumption in terms of telecommuting. And so it's currently kind of at a level of around 14 or 15% is sort of the projection over the last 30 years, over the next 30 years. But I think one of the questions that we've been asking, is there something that the region can do to try to compel more of that to happen by businesses around the region? So I think that is a strategy that we're certainly looking at very closely. And it certainly could be a key way for us to achieve that target moving forward. You know, and I think there's a variety of other strategies that we can look at as well. I think they brought up the idea of electric vehicles. Obviously, I think there's a question about whether, in terms of our investment in EV, including getting the charging capacity out there, can we double down on that? Can we create sort of exponential growth in terms of EV charging? We don't get to take credit in our planning process, unfortunately, for electric vehicles themselves, but if we can put the charging infrastructure out there as a regional action, that's what helps us reach the GHG goal in the eyes of the state of California.
Great, thank you, Matt. One more question. How high must the area airports be raised for sea level rise?
I'll take that question. So the answer is different for the two of the airports. So looking at Oakland's airport, it becomes vulnerable at 3 feet, so it needs to be adapted to that level. The San Francisco airport, for instance, needs to be protected by the time it gets 2 feet of sea level rise. So different timelines for when they need to be adapted. The good news is that San Francisco airport is already attempting to address sea level rise. They currently are attempting to fund a 10-mile seawall that goes around the entire airport. So that's one adaptation measure that they're already taking. But yeah, hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Thank you all, and thank you all again for your questions. They will be back. Our planners will be back to answer more of your questions a little later. But we're going to switch gears now to the interactive part of the meeting. We're going to use the polling software again, the one that we used at the start of the meeting, and I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel and Anoop to remind us how to use the polling software and walk us through the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. So we'd like for you to get ready to share your feedback as we go through the 5 challenges we are trying to address with the Blueprint strategies. So again, as you did before, it's the same address in your web browser, polev.com/mtcabag302, mtcabag302. So you can go to that on your phones or your web browsers, and we will go through the questions one by one. For those participating on your phone only, on your cell phones, you will want to send a text to the number 22333. And in the body of the message, you will want to type MTCABAG302 and hit send. If you're texting, the question will not show on your phone, so we will read the question and all the answer choices for you for each question. So let's get started. Now we'll highlight each of these 5 biggest challenges that we think are still remaining to be addressed in the plan or in the blueprint. So first, the challenge that continues to bite us in the plan is affordable housing. So here's what we integrated into the draft blueprint already to help address the need for affordable housing. One was to allow a greater mix of housing types and densities in the growth areas. The second was to fund more affordable housing protection, preservation, and production. And third was to require developers to build more affordable units. However, there are still hundreds of thousands of low-income households without access to permanently affordable homes. So our challenge here is, how do we create more permanently affordable housing, especially in areas with high-quality schools, amenities, and transportation options? So with the next slide, this is the poll question. Please identify which of these potential strategies should be included in the final blueprint to make the Bay Area even more affordable. And you can select as many as you like. And so we've thrown up 4 ideas on there, which I'll read out now. But on the next page, you'll be able to enter your own ideas too. So A is invest in constructing more affordable housing units. B, accelerate redevelopment of aging malls and office parks with significant shares of affordable housing. C, expand capacity for new housing in communities with well-resourced schools and good access to jobs. D, advance innovative approaches to reducing housing construction and financing costs. Or E, none of the above. So again, as I said, in the next slide, you'll be able to contribute your own ideas. But on this slide, you can select as many as you like. And if you're doing this via text, send the letter choice of your answers as an individual text message to that same text thread where you started the conversation. So let's take a look at what we are getting in here. So I will say the options A, B, and C of investing in constructing more affordable units, or accelerating redevelopment of malls, and expanding capacity of new housing in communities that are well-resourced. These are strategies we already have in our draft blueprint, but what we have here is expanding the scope of those strategies, or accelerating the redevelopment of malls, for example. So we're seeing kind of equal support for the maximum support for investing more in constructing more affordable housing units. And we're followed by innovative approaches to reduce housing and construction of financing costs. And the third is expanding capacity for new housing in communities with well-resourced schools. And fourth, the least popular one, but still with 17% of all respondents, is accelerating redevelopment of malls and office parks, which has been quite a popular strategy actually across all counties, given especially the pandemic now, but also many of our malls turning a little outdated. 4% of you still selected none of the above. So I think this might be a good time to move on to the next slide and hear what ideas you all have. So this is an open-ended question. Is there anything else we should take into consideration to address the challenge of affordability in the Bay Area? And so you can just type in your response. Again, if you're texting, just type in your response in the same thread. No responses received yet. I know you all have ideas. Okay, Rachel, you want to start us off there?
Yeah, it looks like there's interest in having easier access to transit. Several comments about housing, being in need of public housing and providing jobs near that housing. And another comment about access to transit and affordable transit. Good point. And childcare, also a good point, something we discussed expanding.
I see require top 10 or 10% employers in each county to support affordable housing. So in our strategy to fund more affordable housing in the Bay Area, there's different sources of revenues where that funding would come from. And certainly there's one of the sources is taxes on large employers. I'm also seeing childcare. That is another strategy that we do have in the draft blueprint. Childcare subsidies for our lowest income households to help with economic mobility and also just rising housing and transportation costs. I see large employers with high VMT should pay into affordable housing close to site. This is very similar to the existing strategy where funding for the high VM for offices that choose to locate their headquarters where there's high VMT, the fees on them would be used to pay for both affordable housing as well as improving local and regional transit. I also see teleworking. Go on, Rachel.
Oh, I was going to say, we also recently heard from different members in the community, and they've been sharing that the affordable housing challenge isn't just about having units. Also, there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that folks understand how to access the affordable housing that's built. So folks who speak English, or there's folks who have a student status, they may not be able to apply for housing that's built. So there's also some good points that have been brought up in the community.
I'm seeing further points on teleworking allows for people to work from other locations that are more affordable. So teleworking is not just a transportation strategy, but helps reduce helps make housing more affordable to those who can live farther away too. I see subsidized transit costs for low-income residents. So our draft blueprint strategy actually includes 50% discounts to low-income residents for all transit fares and tolls across the Bay Area. See senior living options to free up existing housing. And then I missed one, look at incentives to bring jobs to more affordable areas. Hacienda Business Park was built in Pleasanton in the 1980s to bring businesses to more affordable areas. I'm seeing the responses slow down, so we'll give it a few more seconds. I want to emphasize the option for increasing housing availability in high resource communities, aka upzone and desegregate the suburbs. So there is conscious intention in the draft blueprint to locate or to support housing growth in areas with well-resourced schools and parks, because research has shown continuously that is one of the best ways we can address historical racial segregation. Bay Area has most expensive transit, and we should lower fares. We are also introducing a strategy called fare integration, regional fare integration, where all systems in the Bay Area would operate on the same fare structure. And so that should lower fares, especially for transfers. And finally, I'll say, don't allow 6 jobs to be added to the South Bay for every 1 unit of housing. Point taken. Okay, I think we can move to the next challenge. Rachel?
Great. So here's what we've integrated into the draft blueprint for traffic congestion and transit crowding. Advance high ridership transit projects, reform regional transit fare policy, and implement per-mile tolling on congested freeways with transit alternatives. However, traffic congestion and transit overcrowding continue to worsen on many of the freeway corridors and many transit systems. So our challenge is, how can new or expanded strategies alleviate traffic congestion on suburban highways and reduce overcrowding on bus and rail lines? So we'd like you to identify which of these potential strategies be included in the final blueprint to alleviate traffic congestion and reduce overcrowding on transit in the Bay Area. And with this question as well, you can select as many as you'd like, and I'll read them out for those of you on the phone. For A, an all-lane tolling on high traffic freeways with transit alternatives. B, invest more in world-class bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to make it easier to reach local destinations by car, without a car. C, build more express lanes with robust express bus services. Tongue twister. D, redesign public transit systems to provide more seamless transfers and focus service on high frequency routes. E, extend regional rail services to new communities and increase the frequency of the service. F, widen the highways and expand the interchanges to yield short-term congestion relief. Or G, none of the above. We have lots of results still coming in. It's like there's shifting interest, but pretty consistent for redesigning public transit systems for seamless transfers. And also a lot of interest in extending the regional rail services and increasing the frequency of that service. And catching up, we have investments in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Oops, overtaking it. Lots of interest shifting back and forth here. Widening highways is consistently not quite as popular as these other interests y'all have here. This is great feedback. Thank you. We have a three-way tie. Great. Well, thank you for your interest thus far. There's a few of, none of these were resonating with you, and we'd love to get your ideas on the next slide. Yes, so here's an opportunity for you to provide other ideas. Is there anything else we take into consideration to address congestion and transit crowding? This fall when we've held focus groups, we heard a lot of comments about some changes that would make a difference compared to some of the big ticket strategies discussed. For instance, ensuring that elevators at train systems are working, or schools have a way to reliably know when a train, bus, or ferry will arrive, or simply just making crosswalk lines bolder so drivers know where to stop. There's been lots of ideas of that caliber. Y'all are more than welcome to put in any ideas that you have thus far. Looks like we have a comment that they're great suggestions. All lane tolling should apply to solo drivers, and carpool should be free. Good point. What can you read in your kind of small text?
I see. Look at last mile options to public transit. So definitely part of our bicycling strategies, but also looking forward, I think, with scooters and any other options. Provide shuttles for essential workers to get to their jobs after they get off transit. So that certainly helps build the connection between regional transit and wherever the headquarters choose to locate. Provide safe bicycle access to BART. And I will add that as we are thinking of these last mile options, it is also very important to consider sidewalk access and also making sure all this access is ADA compliant. Expand regional rail also in LA on express lanes. The express lane has a good BRT system that is cheap to build, so just use express lanes and add on freeway stations for buses. LCC, replacing the gas tax with vehicle mile charge or vehicle time usage charge accordingly to equity measures, so we don't punish low-income mega commuters. So that's what the freeway all per mile tolling strategy gets at. The strategy includes right now a 15-cent per mile charge for all vehicles except for carpooling and low-income drivers. So for low-income drivers and carpoolers, the charge is at 5 cents as opposed to 15 cents per mile.
Yeah. See, there's a lot of comments here about transferring between different kinds of systems, like a ferry to a bus, or lots of comments about the bike transfer to transit. And that's something we heard a lot in our focus groups in previous outreach, where people really wanted to see transfers between systems. So we're hearing more of that right now, which is a really good point.
See a comment for work at reversing the commute. not fully sure what that means. So if you want to elaborate, you can put in another comment. Send a check every month to carpoolers as a rebate. Create job centers closer to housing. City congestion charges at peak times for single occupancy vehicles. So there are a couple of project ideas that are being considered for the final blueprint. One of them being a congestion charge for downtown San Francisco. It's really hard to be talking about such charges in the context of the current pandemic. County connection, a couple of county connection buses go through residential neighborhoods on freeways, and we should build stations near freeways so the buses don't need to leave the freeway, but also serve underserved communities.
Great. Well, thank you all for this good feedback thus far. We're going to keep accepting these comments thus far. So just a quick reminder that the commenting will close when the next poll set is presented, but you can get your last comment in the next few minutes. So we're gonna move forward here, and I'll pass it back over to Anu.
Thanks, Rachel. So this is our third challenge, displacement. Here's what we have integrated into the draft blueprint to help address this issue of displacement, which we have seen continuously in the Bay Area for the last many years. First was to further strengthen renter protections beyond what state legislation was last year, to be all over the Bay Area. Second, reduce barriers to housing near transit and in areas of high opportunity by building more housing in those areas. And third, expanding childcare support for low-income families that I mentioned earlier. And yet, the risk of displacement in most Bay Area communities continues to grow over time based on our modeling outcomes. So here's the challenge. How can we further ensure that low-income residents and communities of color are not ultimately displaced to areas with limited access to opportunities? So next slide, again, we have the poll question up. Please identify which of these potential strategies should be included in the final blueprint to address displacement in the Bay Area. And you can select as many as you like. A, expand investment in the preservation of permanently affordable housing in communities facing displacement. B, ensure ample affordable housing is built in communities most at risk of displacement. C, implement workforce training programs to grow the middle class and make it easier to stay in place. D, dedicate and protect ample investments in schools, parks, and transit to improve quality of life in communities where displaced residents are moving to. Or E, none of the above. I'm seeing equal support out. Option B, ensure ample affordable housing is built in communities most at risk of displacement. So these are communities where maybe displacement is already happening or where we expect to happen. Most support for that strategy with 35%. 5% of folks don't like any of the ideas up there. The least support is for dedicating more investments in schools, parks, and transit in communities where displacement residents are moving to. So more support for enabling more affordable housing in areas of opportunity, and also providing more support where low-income communities or communities of color already are. Let's move to the next slide, where we'll open it out to any comments that you might have. So is there anything else we should be taking into consideration to address displacement in the Bay Area? So while we receive your comments, I'll give you some input on what we have been hearing from our focus groups with community-based organizations. We heard that it's not just the barriers to areas of high opportunity are not just in terms of housing itself, but also how they can access that housing. So we heard comments about making sure that folks with poor credit history have a means to rent in their community, or they're able to access legal support or education, so renters are more aware of their rights or more aware of programs through which they can apply for affordable housing. So we're seeing some responses coming in.
Yep.
This is, I will admit this is an extremely challenging problem, and probably the most challenging challenge, I personally think, at least. This trend is pervasive, not just in the Bay Area, but nationally, where lower income residents or colored residents are forced to leave their communities due to rising housing costs. Rachel, you want to read out some of the ideas?
Yeah, one idea is, to provide tax breaks and incentives to employers to retain or hire their employees within 10 miles of the employer. So really keeping their employees close. There's also a comment to encourage more ADUs, so increasing the variety of housing. And let's see, create a grant or funding program for communities to invest in community land trusts to ensure that permanently affordable housing is owned by the residents themselves, and that rental assistance, also, focusing on rental assistance. Great.
Also seeing a comment for don't allow the Bay Area to grow. I don't think we can put restrictions on stopping people from entering the Bay Area, but certainly something to think about where the Bay Area can grow. Concentrating on jobs allocation from jobs-rich areas to job-poor areas. And so we have heard this time and again, we have jobs-poor areas in parts of Contra Costa County or in the North Bay. So how do we help jobs move to those areas? Demand will decrease in jobs-rich areas, and those areas will become more affordable, and then less displacement will occur. Fund programs that assist with deposits. So I'm assuming this means deposits as down payments for homes.
And more interest in, home ownership with low interest loans or no interest loans.
Continue to support renters' right policies and advocacy. Require counties to permit or produce workforce housing to accommodate all workers within their county. Collaboration with venture capital and developers to brainstorm jobs allocation to job-poor areas.
Oh, it looks like the deposits were for rental units.
Got it.
That's a good point about the need for rental assistance.
Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds here for any more ideas. Okay, I think the ideas have slowed down, so we can move on to the next slide. We have 2 more challenges to go. Rachel.
Okay, number 4, we have greenhouse gas emissions. So here's what we've integrated into the draft blueprint for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. To implement per mile tolling on congested freeways with transit alternatives, build a complete streets network and implement reduced speed limits, allow a greater mix of housing types and densities near frequent transit. But however, the draft blueprint only gets us halfway to that emissions reduction goal. So our challenge is, how can we further reduce the transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions to reduce these critical climate goals? So we'll ask for your advice on this once again. So we'd like for you to identify which of these potential strategies should be included in the final blueprint to reduce climate emissions in the Bay. And you can select as many answers as you'd like. So I'll read these out for you so those of you on the phone can hear. For A, that's expand electric vehicle and charging infrastructure subsidies, especially for lower income households. B is to postpone highway widening projects until a greater share of vehicles are electric. C is to charge parking fees to disincentivize driving, putting the fees towards bicycle giveaways or free shuttles. D is to require employers to implement mandatory work from home policies 2 or 3 days per week. And E is none of the above. There's been some drastic shifts back and forth. I've seen none of the above was 0% a second ago, and now there's lots of ideas that y'all have. And right now, it looks like most of the interest is for requiring work from home policies, and also expanding electric vehicle and charging infrastructure subsidies, especially for lower income households. Yeah, these three topics continue to be popular with y'all, with widening projects continuing to be, to hold less interest. So this is great feedback, and the mandatory work from home policies are quite timely as well. We're seeing a lot of the effects of that policy in action right now. Great. Well, great. Thank you for your feedback thus far. Looks like just some small shifts as we move forward, but still work from home and charging infrastructure being really popular with y'all. And again, none of these for some of you. So let's move on to your ideas on the next slide. So is there anything else that we should take into consideration to address climate emissions in the Bay Area? And we'd love to have your feedback here. You can begin inputting answers at any time. We have heard a lot from different focus groups thus far. We've received comments about making sure that all communities have access to parks and green space. Walkable access to parks should be a priority for those without cars. And people also want to make sure that development happens, that does happen, includes amenities like clean energy systems or community gardens. Let's see, we have a few answers that are coming in already. One is to impose a carbon tax. What else do you see, Anouk?
We're seeing bring jobs to housing-rich areas, which is again is the topic of our next challenge too, on jobs housing imbalance. Employer incentives to bike, walk, or another alternative to driving alone. Mm-hmm. So employer incentives to encourage people not to drive. Yeah, more transit, especially rail transit. Also, more energy efficient buses are good. We do know by, I think it's about 2040, that all bus fleets need to be electric. Rather than making work from home mandatory, incentivizing would be a better strategy to avoid penalties to small businesses or maintain choice for businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. I see many comments that bring up the idea of a carbon tax. There continues to be interest in that. Someone also brought up a good point that even if trains are non-electric, it's still less emissions than many cars, especially the way in which people currently drive.
Mm-hmm. We've seen this idea pop up quite a few times. Rideshare companies move to use of EV cars only. Requiring counties to produce and supply workforce housing for all workers within their county. Yes,
there's, if places don't have transit, then you can't take it, which is also a good point, which kind of connects to many of the comments we've seen about, connecting these different forms of transit systems and getting people access. Great. And go ahead.
Commute cards that require payment for solo driving and will provide funding for carpool and public transit or biking.
Great.
The text keeps blurring out on my end.
Oh yeah, it's like we have all deliveries should be electric vehicles, and let's see, the county connections have a lack of bus incentives, or incentives for Uber and Lyft. So, you know, we need to focus on building transit. And also a point about, you know, in addition to working from home, having local drop-in offices for people to use. So that's something to potentially look at. You know, there's similar models for that already exist, and what that could look like expanded. Great. There's a lot of good ideas here. More parking at BART stations, so the parking lot is not full. So allowing for more of that that connectivity to the transit. Great. More bus lanes and community solar. That's a really good idea. Great, thank you. All right, well, we've gotten some really good feedback here thus far, and we welcome you to continue to type in more responses as we move forward. As we said before, you can keep typing until we move to the next poll slide. And yeah, so we'll move on, and I'll hand it back over to Anoop to talk about jobs and housing.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you all again for your continued feedback. Seeing many of these ideas, I wish we could be together in person so we can dive a little deeper into some of these ideas you all are saying. We appreciate your patience with this format. So now we're focusing on our last challenge, which is the jobs housing imbalance. When we refer to jobs housing imbalance, we mean, are we building enough housing to accommodate our workforce here in the Bay Area? So here's what we included to address that challenge in the draft blueprint. As I mentioned before, assessing transportation impact fees on new office developments to encourage them to locate closer to transit. Retain key industrial lands, what Matt was mentioning before about the priority production areas. And then finally, also create incubator programs in economically challenged areas to help generate more job opportunities where in areas that might be jobs poor. And yet, jobs continue to cluster in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, far from many existing residents. So the challenge is, how could we deploy more ambitious economic strategies to shift jobs closer to the existing housing-rich communities? So again, we have the poll question up with some ideas that we have put forward. Please identify which of these potential strategies should be included in the final blueprint to address the jobs housing imbalance in the Bay Area. A, increase fees that discourage development of new office developments of new office parks in jobs-rich and auto-oriented communities. B, expand business incubator programs to create new small businesses in housing-rich communities. C, prohibit more construction of office buildings in communities that have many more jobs than homes. So this is putting a cap on new housing construction. D, provide tax subsidies to major employers to relocate middle-wage jobs closer to affordable housing. And E, none of the above. So we're seeing most support here for option C and D and B, almost equal support.
Yeah,
so,
it's interesting that the none of the above keeps going up and down.
None of the above is, I'm seeing it at 0 right now.
Yeah.
So each of these strategies is a little different. One is about increasing fees. One is about creating new programs to encourage more job growth. One is to put a cap on new construction in areas that have too many jobs already. And the fourth is the most lenient to employers, where it provides tax subsidies to major employers to relocate their jobs, middle-wage jobs, closer to more affordable housing. And that seems to be the most popular one now. 9% of you selected none of the above. And so maybe now would be a good time to move to the next slide. So again, this slide is your opportunity to provide your own ideas. So is there anything else we should be taking into account or into consideration to address the jobs housing imbalance in the Bay Area? How can we bring the jobs to where the housing is, as well as the other way around? As we described earlier, so we talked to focus groups as well, asking such questions, and they wanted to make sure that efforts were included to ensure that not all jobs, but there's more middle wage jobs outside the technology sector. So the question is not only necessarily of moving jobs from one location to the other, but what types of jobs are we moving, and does that fit with what sectors the local residents might be interested in those areas?
Looks like we already have a comment that came in pointing out that since we have so many jobs in Silicon Valley, there should be better connectivity to it. So looking at, those connections and how we can tie it together. Great, and also all of the above. This is something for us to tackle, looking at various collaborations to address it. And there's a balance across the entire region, so really expanding the scope of when we're looking at this, as we're doing now, and making sure that, it's budgeting, for the region, not just in one county or city. And let's see here. Also, another idea for additional employer and employee taxes in the job-rich areas. And we have a few more coming in. This is a tough one to solve. So
yeah, I will add in our research, the jobs housing imbalance is a very unique problem, and when trying to research other ideas that other regions may have implemented, it's really hard to find solutions or best practices, because this problem is quite unique to California and Bay Area especially.
Yeah, that's a good point. Someone mentioned that, ultimately this hinges on zoning changes, so we need to increase density and the mix of uses, which is, something that we can help facilitate dialogue about as a regional agency. And also another point about, connectivity, thinking about how BART could have more capacity. And so if people get into places like San Francisco more easily, it, could shift where we need to build jobs. Great. Also, one comment about how we should start the trend and move to Antioch as an agency. That's an interesting idea. I like being able to walk to work, though. Okay, and then just suggestions for where jobs could go. Great. Well, thank you for your feedback thus far. We have some good ideas that you guys have suggested and some good feedback. We will move forward now, I believe, and we will continue to take more of your feedback for this question. It's great to get your answers. We'll give you just another few seconds here. There's a few more coming in. Adopting RENA to require workforce housing in jobs-rich and housing-poor areas. So using RENA as a tool. That's good feedback here. Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for your responses. I think we're going to shift over to one of our last top two challenges slides. So kind of bringing it home together here, which of the key challenges that we've highlighted is the most urgent to you to be addressed in the final blueprint? So select your top two, which you find of all the challenges we've discussed to be the most urgent for us to address. And so A, that would be housing unaffordability. B, traffic congestion. C, displacement, D, climate emissions, E, jobs, housing, and balance. So this is shifting around a lot. And again, remember, you can select your top two. Like climate emissions is really popular. We can also SPAR, and I also see a lot of interest in housing unaffordability. You know, less interest in congestion and crowding. And so climate emissions and housing unaffordability continue to be, you know, really highlighted.
Yeah, I will add that in the other county workshops that we have had so far too, it's very similar results where housing unaffordability was ranked the highest for the most pressing challenge, followed by climate emissions.
Great. All right. Yeah, so this trend continues to kind of stay in place with displacement taking, you know, a third in terms of, you know, the interest right now. Great, thank you so much for your feedback. This concludes the interactive polling portion of the meeting. So now I'm going to hand it back to Anoop, who's going to tell us about a few other important regional initiatives. Anoop?
Thank you, Rachel. So we know that many of you might be interested in not just the next 30 years, but also on initiatives that are tackling these challenges from transportation to housing to sea level rise in the more short term over the next 5 or 10 years. So we want to spotlight some 3 other initiatives that we have that are sort of related to Plan Bay Area 2050 that you might be more interested in learning about. Let's start with the transportation. So one such effort on the transportation front is called the Transportation Improvement Program, we refer to sometimes as TIP, which reflects local, regional, state, and federal funding priorities and decisions. It's a key document that is the 4-year clearinghouse of Bay Area transportation projects and their funding information. It's focused on the next 4 years, effectively the early years of Plan Bay Area 2050. As the graphic here shows, let me go to the next slide, please. As the graphic here shows on this slide, yeah, at the top, MTC is always interested in new project ideas. So these often get incorporated in our long-range plan, which is Plan Bay Area 2050, and then the Transportation Improvement Program hones in further on the next 4 years of project priorities, which ultimately proceed towards construction and implementation. You'll see a breakdown of the 2019 Transportation Improvement Program expenditures and fund sources at the bottom. We encourage you to check out the project website to learn more. Next, you talk about the initiative that's related to housing called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or sometimes referred to as RHNA. One near-term initiative, this is the near-term initiative that governs housing growth over the next 8-year period. Since 1969, the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, under state law, works with both state and local governments to identify the amount of housing growth that cities, towns, and counties need to plan for over an 8-year period. After the completion of the RHNA process, each local government updates their housing elements and zoning to show how it would accommodate that share of the regional housing need. For the upcoming cycle, which is 2023 to 2031, the Bay Area will need to plan for just over 441,000 units in an 8-year time period, which is a key piece of this envisioned 1.5 million new homes by 2050 in Plan Bay Area. The RHNA process is already well underway, but here are some of the key milestones in the months ahead. This fall, in sync with the final blueprint approval for Plan Bay Area 2050, the allocation methodology will be considered for approval by our board. This allocation must be consistent with the blueprint you've heard about today. Further steps will be taken in 2021, leading to a final allocation, and then updates to local housing elements by January of 2023 in many Bay Area cities and towns. So again, you can check out the project website to learn more. And finally, regarding air quality or regarding rising sea levels, our 2 regional partners, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, have programs related to air quality and climate change and climate resilience, respectively. The Air District creates the Clean Air Plan, with the last iteration approved in 2017. The 2017 plan provides a regional strategy to protect public health and protect the climate. This plan attempts to make progress towards meeting state and federal air quality standards and eliminating health risk disparities from exposure to air pollution among Bay Area communities. The Air District also manages many important grant programs that help local jurisdictions directly, Bay Area businesses, and public access funds to improve air quality in the region. So here are two programs for the public. One is Clean Vehicle Rebates, which are rebates for the purchase or lease of new eligible zero-emission and plug-in hybrid vehicles. And then Clean Cars for All, where low-income families can scrap an old vehicle and get a grant to reduce the cost of an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid, or even a Clipper card. BCDC has a new program called Bay Adapt. It's a 6-month effort to develop and adopt a regional strategy to protect from rising sea levels. As we integrate sea level rise into Plan Bay Area 2050, we've been closely working with them to understand the impacts of sea level rise, but also what strategies we need to protect our shoreline. So again, you can go to their website as well. It's listed on the slide. So now I'll turn it back to Leslie, who will facilitate our Q&A. Leslie?
Great, thank you. Sorry, I was just having trouble there turning my camera on. Okay, for the remainder of our time here today, we're going to go over a few more of the questions and comments that we're receiving. So again, please input your questions and comments into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I briefly want to go back to, sorry, if I could ask also Rachel, Heather, Ross, and Matt to turn their cameras on so that they can be ready to help us answer as many of the questions as we can get through. And as a reminder for those of you joining us by phone only, you will not be able to ask a question as part of this meeting, but please write your questions and comments down, and after the workshop, you can either call our comment line. Again, the number is 415-778-2292. And we will enter those into the official record, or you can also send us detailed written comments via email to info@planbayarea.org. So the first question I have here is from Kristen. Requiring cities with BART but without employment to build dense housing is very tough from a local congestion standpoint. I live in Lafayette, and trips to the grocery store, to kids' activities, and schools still require car trips by the folks living in multifamily housing. Shouldn't the goal be to create the same number of housing units as there are jobs in a particular city? So who would like to take this question?
I can take this. This is Matt. I think that our goal as a region and sort of looking at different counties and sub-regions is definitely to try to create a bit more of a balance. And I think one of the key discussions that we have in planning is how much should growth be focused in sort of job centers in bigger cities, and how much of it should be spread a little more widely, and what role does each individual jurisdiction have in kind of shouldering some of that burden. I think we mentioned we kind of sped by the RHNA process, RHNA, but that's also a very key piece of the RHNA process this time. RHNA is supposed to be sort of consistent with Plan Bay Area, which is a 30-year vision, but RHNA is a shorter term housing allocation, sort of an 8-year housing allocation. And I think the folks that are working on that methodology right now, that's sort of one of the precise questions that they're kind of looking at, is to what degree should it be as focused as Plan Bay Area, or should it be looked to be a little more spread where different jurisdictions are sort of doing their part to help solve that crisis.
Great, thank you, Matt. I just want to acknowledge Mark's comments here. He sent us some transportation proposals via email, which we will share with our planners. And he comments here that they're cost effective and we wouldn't have to rely on the feds. And they could be funded with regional or state funds. But additionally, he added, I could not understand why you did not use the state's goals for carbon reductions as a floor above which or in compliance with which you could align your positions.
So I can help sort of answer that. So we do comply with the state goals for GHG reductions. So this plan needs to comply with SB 375, which is sort of a slice of the overall state pie. And it's really the regional role in terms of the statewide, the wider statewide efforts to curb GHG. So really the challenge for this plan is centered largely around automobiles and light duty trucks. Ensuring that we can reduce GHG per capita from that sector. But I think it's also important to state that that doesn't mean that that is sort of sufficient for our planning. While that's what we have to comply with, we have wider efforts in this plan to look at GHG more widely in the building sector and also to adapt to sort of what's coming down the pike. I think you heard Rachel talk about sea level rise and sort of adaptation to that and what the region needs to invest in order to protect homes and businesses from that. So there's a big time adaptation angle to this, but there also is a GHG reduction angle to this. But again, our focus is primarily on auto trips.
Great, thanks, Matt. One more question. Are there any plans to increase ped safety, for example, with ped bridges?
So I can take that one. So the answer is yes. This plan has, I think, one of the 25 strategies that we may have seen tonight has to do with safety. So the plan is emphasizing this time around sort of lowering speed limits, including on local streets and residential streets. There's a GHG benefit to doing that, but also the big co-benefit there is safety for cyclists and pedestrians. I would also mention that last month or a couple months ago at the MTC Commission, we also worked to adopt a Vision Zero resolution, and that's something that has been done by some localities throughout the Bay Area, but MTC as a regional body has just adopted a Vision Zero policy as well, and that's a policy that's sort of reflected in some of the targets that we look at for safety with our transportation system around the region. We're also looking at ways to just ensure that our data collection on safety issues is better and that we're working more closely with local jurisdictions on specific strategies in those communities to make streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Great, thank you, Matt. So I have a tip question. Can you explain the tip again? It went too quick, so I wonder if Ross maybe can jump in and briefly give us an overview of the tip.
Sure, I can take care of that. So the tip is a federal document. It includes all federally funded transportation projects in the Bay Area, as well as any project that affects air quality within the region on a significant basis. It covers a 4-year time period. And here we're talking about the plan, which goes to 2050, but the tip shows what is actually being implemented and constructed as a result of the plan within the next 4 to 5 years. And there's currently about $15 billion worth of projects that are scheduled in the current tip for the next 4 years. And that includes projects such as the 684 interchange, the 680 express lanes, as well as BART extensions to San Jose, some work in San Francisco. So it covers a huge variety of projects that are federally funded or affect air quality. And it is a direct result of our planning process. And it is intended to implement the plan which we're here discussing today.
Great, thank you, Ross. Another question, why aren't places like Atherton, Woodside, and Portola Valley not required to have density multifamily when so many jobs are located down there?
I can take that. I think one of the big aspects of the planning process that's changed this time around is an emphasis on higher resource areas. And I think the question that's being posed is, to what degree should housing growth be located in areas that have, as you mentioned, good access to jobs, but also are communities with, well-funded schools. And if you're a child that's growing up in these communities, that you have a good chance of success in life relatively. And so I think that is an open discussion, this concept of high resource areas and to what degree future housing growth is located there. It's something that this Plan Bay Area 2050 works toward. I think that the thing that we're trying to stay mindful of is the fact that with this GHG requirement, we're looking to focus growth in areas that also are adjacent to high quality transit, as well as being areas of high resource. And I think that's part of what you see out of this draft blueprint, sort of those results. I talked a little bit about the RHNA process before, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And again, that's an 8-year housing allocation that needs to be consistent with the plan. And that is very much a live conversation happening with the Housing Methodology Committee, which is part of RHNA, is to what degree should housing growth be located in communities such as the ones that you named, many of which are sort of high resource in nature.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question related to transit. It's often the case that there is a trade-off between having maximum ridership and maximum coverage. For example, improving high-density traffic routes comes at a cost of increasing transit networks to increase coverage. Which of the two is the MTC more focused on right now, and why?
I can take on that question, Leslie. Thank you for the question, Eric. I'm not going to say that MTC tries to focus on one or the other. The way we evaluated projects in this plan is look at holistically if projects help improve accessibility of residents, and that means, are people able to get to where they want to go more easily, more quicker, at a lower cost, etc. And in some locations, it makes more sense to invest in improving the frequency of buses, for example, and in other location, it makes sense to have more coverage. But we use the same metric to determine whether this improves accessibility of the residents or not. Now, we definitely, it is a priority also to provide coverage to our lowest income residents in what we call right now the communities of concern. And so that is definitely a priority as to like where new projects might be located, or where we might choose to improve frequency of buses, for example. I know this question is also very short-term focused, especially now given how transit services are affected, and this is certainly a conversation that is being had in the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force, which is an ongoing task force to help determine the best immediate path forward for our transit woes.
Thank you, Anoop. So we have about 5 more minutes left for questions, and I still have a few here, so we could keep that in mind. Can you explain how once you get a final plan, you measure success against the plan? And how do you enforce the plan with local jurisdictions? Sorry, big question.
I can take that question too. So there is actually an attachment that you can find on our website that has several metrics that help answer your question on what the outcomes of the plan are, what metrics we are using to measure these outcomes. And it is from those metrics that we determined that those were the 5 key challenges that we want to focus on. So that we will continue using those metrics and refining those metrics too. And if you have ideas on how we should be measuring outcomes of the plan, we certainly welcome those ideas. And sorry, I may have missed the second part of the question.
I think the second part of the question was how do you work with local jurisdictions to implement the plan? So I think several ways that we work to do that. I think one is through our priority development areas programs. These are parts of the region that are locally nominated for growth. And what we have done over the last couple plan cycles is we have worked to support these locally nominated areas with transportation infrastructure funding to sort of support these areas that are looking to develop in terms of housing and jobs. So it's capital infrastructure money, it's active transportation resources, and quite often it's also it's planning money to develop sort of specific plans for some of these PDAs. So that's really one way that we work in partnership with local jurisdictions. I think the other part of it is again the RENA process. I sound like a broken record, but I think RENA's on my mind. In that process, once we develop a RENA allocation and the board of ABAG approves it, local jurisdictions are required to include essentially zone for that in their housing elements, in their local housing elements. So with the knowledge that that is a very tough hill to climb, the RENA number is quite high this time, and local jurisdictions, especially given COVID-19, may be strapped in terms of staff resources. We are working to supply local technical assistance to jurisdictions to help them with that effort, sort of in developing their general plan, selecting sites, and things along those lines.
Great, thank you. Before I move on to the final question, I do want to acknowledge Lisa's comment here. Great ideas for the 441,000 new housing units. Maybe there can be policies to implement housing that has no gas infrastructure and electric only. So thank you for the comment, and thank you, Mark, for all your great comments. I know I saw our planners reading your comments. And our last question is, COVID has dramatically changed public transit funding. Will the plan be changed because of this?
So, yeah, I mean, we have worked quite a bit since the pandemic began to update our planning assumptions where appropriate. So I think that the area of the plan that's affected the most, there's a few things, but I think one of the areas is sort of the financial projections for transportation that we make. We have needed to adjust those assumptions downward based on COVID. We've also had to work to make some adjustments a bit to jobs and housing in the early years of the plan, just to account for the fact that we are indeed in an economic recession right now. That being said, it's a 30-year plan. Typically, we assume that there will be economic ups and downs over the course of that time period. It just so happens that this one is happening like right at the beginning of the planning cycle. So we have worked, our forecasters and modelers have worked to update some of those assumptions. On the public transit question, most centrally, I would definitely point you toward the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force that MTC has convened. They actually had a meeting earlier today, and they're talking about these exact issues right now. They are talking about ensuring that we can get federal funding out to the transit operators to kind of keep them whole during this crisis. But they're also kind of shifting their attention to planning for kind of the next phase of the transit system, how to get transit operators back up and running safely, and also thinking a lot about whether there are opportunities to redesign the network and sort of make it more seamless and integrated for the passenger, which I think includes taking a look at the fact that there are 28 different transit operators in the region. So that's a tough question, and I'm sure the Blue Ribbon Task Force will be looking at that too.
Great, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I know we didn't get to some of the questions, so if you could please send any remaining questions and comments to info@planbayarea.org, that would be great. And we have captured all of the poll results and your questions and comments. All of the input we received today will feed into the blueprint and will also be presented to our commission as well as the ABAG Executive Board members in September. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Ursula, who will wrap up the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Leslie. Before I start the wrap up, I just wanted to acknowledge, hot off of the Blue Ribbon Task Force that Matt mentioned, is one of my very favorite commissioners and Vice Mayor of Orinda, Amy Worth. So I just wanted to let you know that she joined us a little bit late. So I just wanted to take a few more minutes to tell you what's next for Plan Bay Area and remind you of the ways that you can provide additional comments. The next steps for the draft blueprint include continuing public engagement through the public comment period, which we mentioned ends August 10th. The Commission and ABAG Board will then take action on the final blueprint this fall. Selection of the preferred environmental alternative takes place at the end of 2020. The adoption of Plan Bay Area 2050 is slated for fall of 2021. To get additional information on the plan throughout the process and the draft blueprint, please go to planbayarea.org/blueprint for lots of information about the blueprint. You can access the background information reports such as those you see here. And you can also access the video. There was a little bit of an audio issue earlier, so please access our video. It's very exciting and fun. And it's available at planbayarea.org, same page, /blueprint. And in addition, if you have more input to share, we want to hear from you. You can send written comments to info@planbayarea.org. And as Leslie mentioned, we're going to take the comments that we received, but that last question, if you could please send that to info@planbayarea.org, we will answer it for you. So please do that, or any other questions you have. And as we've mentioned several times, we have a phone line for those of you on the phone. Please call 415-778-2292 and leave a verbal comment, and we will enter it into the record. Finally, we have an online form to provide a written comment on the Plan Bay Area website. Go to planbayarea.org/blueprint and go to the public comments page, and you'll see it there. So we want to thank you again for spending so much time with us. We know it's a difficult time for so many of us, and we appreciate your participation and all of your comments. One more time for the record, info@planbayarea.org is where you send your questions and comments. If you'd know someone else who'd like to participate but could not attend today, video of this presentation will be posted and a link to the survey you took today will be available. So please spread the word. We will be hosting many more virtual events, actually 6 more for the other counties, but anyone can attend as we mentioned earlier. And finally, last day to comment, Monday, August 10th. So thank you to everyone, all of our presenters, Q&A people, and of course you, the public and our elected officials. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.